When a government seems lacking, people are simple and sincere. When a government interferes with everything, it all goes wrong. To explore the merits of this Taoist quote, we visit China, Vietnam, and Emperor Claudius Rome. We finally have time to visit the Pacific nations. And we meet Saint Paul, the co-founder of Christianity. In 23 AD, General Liu Shu defeated Wang Mang's armies in the Battle of Kunyang, bringing an end to the short-lived Qin dynasty, as we saw in the previous episodes. Liu Shu was a distant descendant of the great Emperor Wu. After he was able to forge several alliances and achieve military successes north of the Yellow River, he claimed the title of emperor with the name Guangwu of Han. Thus, in 25 AD, the Han dynasty was restored. But there were still a number of local rulers he had to deal with. So it wasn't until 42 AD that Emperor Guangwu had reunified the entire empire under his control. Except for the lost territories in the far west, which would not be recaptured from the Xiongnu until the 70s of the 1st century. The capital Chang'an laid in ruins, and was moved to Luoyang. Hence the name Eastern Han Dynasty. The name Luoyang comes from the ancient city's location on the northern side of the Luo River, which is the sunny, or yang side. Many Han cities grew large. The western Han capital Chang'an was already home to 250,000 people. The new capital, Luoyang, had twice as many. Most ordinary citizens lived in large urban and suburban areas outside the city walls. Data that were generated for the purpose of taxation indicate that this urbanization continued. At the beginning of the 1st century, the 60 million or so inhabitants of Han China, nearly a third of the world's population at the time, were spread over more than 12 million households. This amounts to about 5 persons per household. By the middle of the 2nd century, this was down to 3 or 4 per family. Emperor Guangwu had already been an artful strategist when he was still a general. He was known for being both cautious and merciful. As the emperor, he preferred to seek diplomatic solutions rather than military confrontation. As long as the empire had not regained its former strength, he may well have considered reunification more important than new conquests. Especially in rural areas, the population had suffered a lot from the wars and natural disasters of the past era. This, ironically, may have helped to bring about at least some modest land reforms. Rural irrigation works were also restored. The tax burden was lowered as well, and the currency stabilized. Trade flourished once again and wealth started to accumulate. For the time being, the Han dynasty had acquired itself a new mandate of heaven. Guangwu of Han was said to have rather stayed on his farm than to become the emperor. He does indeed come across as one of the very few rulers who are able to put the interests of country and people above their own. Such a politician would qualify for the title of statesman, but it's very hard to say with any certainty whether that is the case here. He did manage to keep his generals happy without giving them too much power. Apparently, he would also rather listen to the advice of scientists than the malicious scheming of the eunuchs and widows at the imperial court. Even before he became Emperor Guangwu, Liu Xiu had already married his true love, Yin Lihua. In 24 AD though, not long after that, he entered into a second marriage with Guosheng Tong, mainly for political reasons. She was the first to give the emperor a son, who was therefore destined to become the crown prince, at least initially. But by 41 AD, Empress Guosheng Tong had fallen into disgrace and had to give up her title to Yin Lihua. Finally, Yin was officially the Empress Guangli. Thus her eldest son, Liu Zhuang, became the new crown prince. And in 57 AD, the year Emperor Guangwu died at the age of 62, It was he who assumed supreme power, under the title of Emperor Ming of Han. In 40 AD, a revolt against Han rule broke out in North Vietnam. This rebellion was led by Chung Chak and her sister Chung Nai. The Chung sisters were daughters of a wealthy aristocratic family of Lac ethnicity. These peoples had inhabited the Red River Delta for ages. But more and more, they felt threatened by increased Chinese immigration and cultural oppression. It took until 43 AD before Emperor Guangwu finally intervened, by sending General Ma Yuan south to crush the rebellion. To this day, the rebellious sisters are remembered as true heroes of Vietnamese history. North Korean Lelang had also revolted against the Han Empire, but was brought back under its control as early as 30 AD. On the Korean peninsula, the period of the Three Kingdoms has been underway since 57 BC. These kingdoms were Byakji, Silla, and Goguryeo. From the latter comes the name Korea, but culturally, all three must have had much in common. Nevertheless, linguists believe that the so-called peninsular Japonic languages that were initially spoken in Korea were displaced by Korean languages and became extinct. But on the Japanese islands, these languages lived on, brought there over the previous centuries by the Yayoi people. This Yayoi period would last until 300 AD. During that era, their culture blended in with the ancient, indigenous Jaman culture. The Yayoi people introduced wet rice farming and all kinds of innovations in textiles and iron, bronze, and woodworking. The Japanese population grew rapidly and distinct social classes formed. The tribes of the Yayoi gradually grew into a number of kingdoms. The Book of the Later Han tells us that in 57 AD, Emperor Guangwu of Han granted a golden imperial seal to the king of Nakoku, a state located on the Japanese island of Kusu. In return, Nakoku envoys in the Chinese capital offered tributes and formal New Year wishes. This King of Na gold seal was recovered more than 1,500 years later by a farmer on the island of Shikanoshima. Between 3000 and 1000 BC, speakers of Austronesian languages began to spread from Taiwan into Southeast Asia. Further south, we find an enormous variety of Papuan languages. And in Australia, too, there is an endless mix of languages and cultures. It is believed that the ancestors of the Australian Aboriginals arrived from Africa and Asia as early as 65,000 years ago. Back then, sea levels were tens of meters lower than today. Some of the stories told by those peoples go that far back in time. Often called myths, they turn out to be surprisingly accurate. For instance, traces of volcanic eruptions dating back 10,000 years have been found, as well as long-vanished landscapes and large animals that are told about in these tales. Those oral traditions are as diverse as the peoples themselves. What they do share is a strong connection to nature and the land, as opposed to the individual and his ego. The creation stories vary as well, but they have in common a dark nothingness from which everything in nature has been dreamed up. In the dreamings of various peoples of Southeast Australia, Byami is the creator. There, in nowadays Victoria, we meet Bunjil too. Elsewhere, we may find various versions of the rainbow serpent. But is there a creation story anywhere that does not somehow involve a serpent or a dragon? Well, perhaps in Rome, which, after all, was founded by the twin brothers Romulus and Remus. In the previous episode, we talked a lot about the deadly power struggles within the Julio-Claudian dynasty. With the help of his disabilities, Tiberius Claudius Caesar had managed to stay out of trouble. Thus it could happen that Claudius was proclaimed emperor by the Praetorian Guard in 41 AD, on the same day that his cousin Caligula was assassinated. Claudius struggled with tics and speech problems. Maybe he suffered from cerebral palsy, or perhaps Tourette's syndrome. Later in life, however, his condition improved. He himself said he had exaggerated the symptoms for his own safety. Regardless, his family felt embarrassed with him. Claudius' grandmother Livia and her husband, Emperor Augustus, would rather not be seen with the young Claudius in public. This left him every opportunity to study. He devoted himself to writing several historical works, none of which have survived. Which is very unfortunate, but it did earn him a little more respect from his relatives, notably the divine Emperor Augustus. But at the same time, his writings brought new disputes. Especially when his views of recent Roman history conflicted with the narratives that the imperial family would consider to be the appropriate versions. Only when Caligula became emperor in 37 AD, and appointed Claudius as his co-consul, did he become more involved in politics. Whether Claudius knew about the plot to assassinate Caligula is unknown. Apparently, Caligula did indeed treat him rather poorly, and after his death, the first thing Claudius did was to reward the Praetorian Guard richly. In doing so, he bought loyalty, but he also set a dangerous precedent. Until then, such appointments would have been made by the Senate. So now the balance of power had shifted even further from the Senate to the imperial palace. In other ways too, Claudius' policies did not always sit well with the senatorial class. He favored the equestrians, and prompted fierce debates when, himself born in present-day Lyon, he advocated the appointment of Celts as senators. Claudius considered his freed slaves to be much more trustworthy and loyal than his fellow politicians. These freedmen were given more and more official positions, which created a powerful bureaucracy in service of the emperor. Nevertheless, the amateur historian Claudius is regarded as an efficient and popular emperor. He certainly did have some military successes, the invasion of Britain being the most famous. But he is also portrayed as a drinker and a gambler. Perhaps because he had more luck at the gambling table than he had in the love game. Especially his fourth marriage to his niece Agrippina Jr. raised a lot of eyebrows. Eventually she became his downfall as she wanted her son Nero on the throne, instead of Claudius' own son Britannicus. Which is indeed what happened in 54 AD, when Claudius died at the age of 64. During this period, St. Paul was busy writing his letters from his residence in Corinth. Of the Pauline epistles that we know from the New Testament, 7 are considered to have actually been written by himself. Paul was born Saul of Tarsus, Roman citizen of Jewish descent. Tarsus was a prosperous city with a famous university, teaching Greek philosophy. Although he was born in 5 AD, Paul had never met Jesus of Nazareth in person. Rather, he was said to have little regard for the Nazarenes, as the followers of Jesus were called. But then, as the story goes, he saw the light, and would go on to become Christ's most influential apostle. With his companions he traveled throughout the Roman Empire to spread the message of Jesus as the Son of Man and Savior from all sin. They aimed their efforts especially at the Gentiles, the non-Jews that is, and founded several Christian communities. Because of this, Paul could be seen as the de facto founder of the Catholic Church. After the Great Fire in 64 AD, Nero began persecuting the early Christians in Rome, blaming them for the disaster. The apostles Paul and Peter are both believed to be among the victims. To get some idea of his message, we end with a few quotes from the letter that Paul wrote to his fellow Christians in Rome, only 7 years earlier.
Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like a mortal human being and birds, animals, and reptiles. I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes, first to the Jew, then to the Gentile. There will be trouble and distress on everyone who does evil, first on the Jew, then on the Gentile. But glory, honor, and peace for everyone who does good, first for the Jew, then for the Gentile. For there is no difference between Jew and Gentile, the same Lord is Lord of all, and richly blesses all who call on him. Don't you know what the scripture says about Elijah, how he appealed to God against Israel? Lord, they have killed your prophets, and torn down your altars. I am the only one left, and they're trying to kill me. And what was God's answer to him? I have reserved for myself 7,000, who have not bowed the knee to Baal.
See you in the next decade.